I went on this journey from like 19 to 23, 24, where I started one business, it went really well. I started another one, and had all this like potential, people kept telling me. And then I got to 25, felt like I'd kind of lost the purpose behind what I was doing. I became a woman, like in my body, like I could feel that I was a woman, and I saw myself as a woman walking down a street, and I could hear guys like catcalling me and like shouting stuff, and I felt this incredible vulnerability that I'd never felt as a man. I felt this huge shame and guilt the way that I'd perhaps treated women in the past, where I hadn't necessarily considered the implications of some of the things that I'd done and how the vulnerability they would have felt as a result of my action. I cried. I was like, can't believe I wasn't aware of this.
On today's episode, Louie Blake, plant-based food and sustainable business evangelist, entrepreneur, angel investor, and public speaker.
Louie, thank you so much for joining me today. If your life was a movie, what genre would it be?
Genre. I think it would encompass pretty much all genres, actually. I don't think I could pick a specific one. I think it would have elements of there's definitely a lot of comedy. Perhaps I can take a comedic approach to some of the things that happen that maybe feel horrific. That's one way of coping with it. But yeah, probably I think a little bit of everything. Massive ups, massive downs. But I think I'd prefer to have big ups and big downs than just a very boring, dull, straight line.
Fair play. And what would be the starting scene of your movie?
I think probably the biggest transition point I had was around the age of 16. So, like leaving school, trying to figure out what to do. I think that's everyone's kind of biggest transition, rites of passage for the most part. I had a traumatic event happen. A friend of mine got killed. I was involved in the incident, shall we say.
That was when you were 16?
I was 16, yeah. And it framed how I looked at life very differently to how I'd approached life before that, right? It's like, you're invincible, you're guaranteed to live until this old age, and I've got time, and, had that not happened, maybe I would have followed a slightly different path, but having that understanding of mortality and, wow, like, life really can be short, it gave me a sense of urgency and probably a regard for life that led me to think, okay, well, what do I really want to do? And I'm not willing to compromise on that. It seemed like a waste if I was just going to take a job in an office to make some money and then try and figure it out. I'm like, what do I want to do now? Because maybe life could be over really quickly, as I just seen, right? And yeah, I think that kind of shaped my mindset around what I wanted to go and do thereafter. And the next kind of few years after that, I was all over the place. Like, I went to live in New York for a year. I went to live in Mexico for 2 years. Came back home.
That's doing soccer.
Yeah, I was doing soccer. Yeah, came back, started 1 company, 2 company, 3 company. I just went for it. And I think that was...
So that was really a crucial moment in your life that completely changed everything for you. So I was reading, obviously in my research also about this journey. You left school, you dropped out at 16, you went to New York, as you said. You went to Mexico. What's happening in your household throughout this whole time? Were your parents okay with you, just dropping out, leaving, doing whatever you want?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, very supportive, honestly. Like, I think I've always been quite independent and headstrong. And if I wanted to do something, that was like, it's happening. So when I was kind of fixated on working in football at 16, I was like, look, there's no point in me going to get A-levels or going to university when I don't know what I want to do. I know what I want to do now, and it's I want to teach football. So if I know that, what's the point in doing this other stuff? I can do some qualifications in this subject, and I might as well just go straight to work and work on it. And I made quite a compelling argument, I suppose, for why that should be. And they went with it. And then the New York thing, I kind of started telling people I was going to live in New York. I was like 18. Everyone's reaction is, oh yeah, sure, how are you going to do that? And
you're from Norwich.
Yeah. And then lo and behold, like, the opportunity came up and I took it. Yeah.
How did it come up?
So I was teaching soccer up in Norwich, and I was doing that full time. But the problem is in teaching soccer is that there's not a huge amount of full-time work for someone to teach soccer, right? And a lot of the work there is like it's basically babysitting, like it's taking kids after school and like doing basic. And I wanted to do more of the kind of professional kind of stuff. And the money for that in the UK isn't great, and the opportunity to do that in the UK isn't great. But I saw in the US they're much more heavily invested in youth sport. There's more money in it. There's a lot of British coaches I saw going over to the US. So I applied for an interview. Might have given them a wrong age on the interview. Went to the interview, went really well. They offered me the job, and then I came clean. And I went to get the visa. I wasn't supposed to start work until the summer, but my visa came through in like February. And so the same day I booked the flight and went downstairs and said to my mum, right, I'm going. And and then went. And then I was living away from home for, I think I was there for like 10 months, something like that. It was that in itself was an amazing experience, right? To have to fend for yourself at 18 in a different country, different culture. I think we think of the US as quite a similar culture because the language is the same, but it was very, very different.
What were the most shocking moments for you there in those 10 months?
Just having to figure stuff out for myself, having always lived at home until that point, having to figure out how to use the washing machine, how to, cook. I was already cooking and stuff, but, having to figure out those.
Were you living alone?
Huh?
Were you living alone?
I was living with some other guys that I was working with, yeah. But it was the freedom just to, go out and do whatever you want. It was, it was good.
So everything you did in your businesses, even when you came back, there's a pattern that I see. You always choose and you pick things that you really like and you're passionate about. That shows me that you're very congruent and intuitive from very early on, but not a lot of people are like that. So, or even have the courage. They don't have the awareness, nor they have the courage to pursue that. So what do you think made you that way?
It's an interesting question because it's in the same way that I guess that it can be difficult for people to put themselves in that headspace. It's difficult for me to put myself in the headspace of someone that potentially wouldn't want to do that.
But you do recognize that is unorthodox.
I recognize it. I mean, if I think about, the thought of going to work for, and the emphasis on the work being the money that I would be paid, like makes me anxious even thinking about it. Like purely like having to go and sit in an office on someone else and be dictated to by somebody else what time I had to arrive, what time I had to leave, and then be there with the sole purpose of earning enough money. That scares me. That for me felt like more of a risk.
That does give a bit of anxiousness now that you say it that way.
It makes me, and that's what I could see was a potential at that age of 16, right? And I think potentially it's easier for me to sit here and say that because it's what I've done from a young age. I didn't see a risk in it. I didn't see a risk because I'm like, okay, what do I love doing? Okay, I love doing, like at the time it was the football coaching, right? So if I love it, when I go to do it, I'm going to pour my energy and my passion and my love for it into that work. If you do that consistently, you can't help but get good at something. If you get good at something, whatever it is, even if it's something that's reasonably niche, the world's big enough or small enough now, and I suppose, to be paid for that if you're very good at it. So I just saw that as the opportunity. Let me get really good at something, and then there's a value exchange. I exchange what I'm good at and what I know for money, and as long as I can earn enough to live and my basic needs are covered, I've got all of my fulfillment from doing that work. And I think a byproduct of that is that you end up being successful because you love it so much and you're willing to pour so much into it and it's so meaningful to you.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm just surprised because what happens a lot of time I observe in high schools and with students, they're only looking at one step ahead. They're not looking at that vision 10, 20, 40 years down the line. So they don't really question the status quo. And that's how they end up in this trap, this rat race later on. So the fact that you actually envisaged that so early on when you were 16, you said, okay, well, if I follow this conventional path, that's literally where it's going to take me. And that is not for me. And then taking action on that to me is...
There's a useful thing you can do with this at any stage, right? If you look at potentially a business that you're in or a job that you're in, look at the people that are 10 years ahead of you or 20 years ahead of you and ask you if you'd want to be doing what they're doing when you're there at their age. If the answer is no, sometimes it's time to switch, right? I've had that even with businesses. I've been 2 or 3 years into a business. I look at the people around me. I'm like, do I want to be where this person is in 10 years?
What were your parents doing?
So my mum she worked in a preschool. She loved it.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad worked offshore, on oil rigs. He was gone for 8 weeks at a time, 10 weeks at a time, and then back and forward. But sacrificed a lot so that my mum didn't have to work and could spend time with us and raise us. So I think that sacrifice, hard work kind of perspective was instilled quite early. Because I remember even being like, 12 or 13, if I wanted something, it's like, cool, how you gonna get it? Asking for money, it's like, no, you need to do something to get the money. I'm not just gonna give you the money. What are you gonna do? So,
That
that's
is
like
so precious.
things like having a paper round, or, I had a job. I was cleaning boats in a boatyard on a Saturday morning for like £15 for like 3 hours or something when I was like 14. Or like going around washing people's cars and just anything, to try and earn money.
Because you already had something that you wanted to do with that money. That's really good. And this is literally the ABC of good parenting, right? Not just handing your kids things or even answers. It's asking them questions and making them actually find out the answers for themselves.
So I was fortunate in that regard, but I think it's not. I think it's something you can learn later. I think it's something you can definitely educate yourself on, whether it's like YouTube books, etc. You can definitely do the work later, but it certainly helps if you've been raised, in that way for sure.
Yeah, environment, right? Helps big time. And another thing that I picked up on is, I'm guessing one of your core values could be freedom.
Probably the highest value, yeah.
Yeah. And, you can really tell by the fact that at that age, you went the unconventional way purely because you were not going to have anybody tell you what to do. And that is an exertion of your own personal freedom. I can resonate very much because that's my core value as well. So in a way, again, I think, because I always advocate this importance of paying attention and taking time to actually define and find what your core values are. So even though you probably hadn't defined them at that time, you felt them very strongly and you followed that compass. And I'm guessing that compass has taken you to great places today, right? But this is a perfect example for me to see how living by your core value, living by your values, bores fruit.
I think it's something that compounds over time, because there's a quite a high degree of trust that's necessary to be able to stick to those values and not be pulled in other ways, right? And once you've trusted in your values and you've trusted that things will come to you, once it happens once, you attach a little bit more belief into it the next time, and it compounds over time. So that now, when I'm having to make a decision, I've got a lot more trust in the best thing will happen for me, because I've witnessed it multiple times in the past when I've really doubled down on what are my core values that I can lean on to make the right decision for me. And it tends to work out, if you zoom out, it tends to work out for the best.
Couldn't agree more with that. At 25 years old, you found yourself immersed in a nightlife scene, which was one of the businesses that you were doing. But you were, quote, disillusioned with life, suffering from crippling anxiety and heavy alcoholism. That's when you shifted to vegan diet and things changed for you. Can you speak on that period of life? Why did things have to change?
I think other people started to point it out to me. Like I went on this journey from like 19 to 23, 24, where I started one business, it went really well. I started another one, and, I had all this like potential, people kept telling me, right? And then I got to 25 and it felt like I'd kind of lost the purpose behind what I was doing. So I was doing it at that point, I was doing it purely for money. I enjoyed it, but maybe I was enjoying it a bit too much, right? So it became, I guess, an outlet. I was coping with life through that thing of like, I was drinking, but I was in that environment as well. And when I say disillusioned, I was like, wow, I've got all of the things that I thought I wanted to be happy, but I'm not happy. And so what I couldn't figure out. I've worked so hard and I've done all of these things to get to this point, and I've got all the things I think I want, and I'm doing the things I thought I should want to do, but I feel completely empty.
Should want to do.
And I guess that kind of subscribe to a cultural narrative of those things that are enforced and rewarded and sanctioned by the culture, right? It's like, I want to be partying, I want the latest clothes, I want to have loads of money, I want to go to these destinations and all this stuff that looks good, but it was empty of it. It was devoid of any feeling, and it was all very much about me. It was all about me. There was very little service to anyone else. It was all about, what can I get? And the reason adopting a vegan diet helped with that is because for the first time I'd started thinking about the way that my actions impacted other people. So up until that point, it'd been all about me. How much money can I make? How well can I do? What do I look like? My own personal pleasure, feeling, whatever, regardless of anyone else.
In that moment, all the businesses were nightlife related.
Nightlife related. I mean, there was a recruitment company, which I didn't enjoy recruitment at all, but it was a good business, and it was a lot of nightlife stuff. And when I became aware of the kind of the vegan, what veganism is, it's like, wow, every time I buy something, it has a knock-on effect. Every time I eat something, it has a knock-on effect. And it's literally a being has to die for me to eat this thing. It's like, wow. And I really connected with that, and it really resonated with me. And I just overnight was like, okay, I'm not eating animals anymore. And then shortly after, I had an experience with plant medicine. So I had a call in to go and do ayahuasca. And ayahuasca for me was like holding this giant mirror up, and I saw who I was and what I was becoming. And I was disgusted with myself, and I was like, okay, I need to change.
So there's almost two parts to then this massive shift in your life. There's the first big step, which is stumbling upon veganism, trying it. Was there a documentary or something?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I must have been like hungover in bed one Sunday, eating, crap food, feeling sorry for myself. So I need to feel better. I've got no energy. I had fatigue. I was burnt out. I was, not doing my best work. And yeah, it came up, and I watched the documentary, and I tried it for a month, and I just felt great. And it made me, the better I started to feel, the less it made me wanted to have the late nights and drink and, eat bad stuff.
Sounds like it really, really was like a domino effect. And then ayahuasca ceremony that you tried, which by the way, I've been saying for 5 years, probably that I want to do that. I want to try that. So when occasion presents itself, I shall. I hear good things.
I think you find it at the time you're supposed to find it. And it's not for everyone, right? I don't think it's something that should be taken lightly. I was really intimidated going into it. The thought of going back to it now is intimidating, and it should be, quite rightly so, because you're essentially diving back into the most traumatic experiences of your life, potentially past lives, things that you can't even remember, like
but
trauma that's deeply rooted and stored, and it can be transformative for people. But I think it finds you at the time that you're ready to go in and take that step.
And that's precisely why I'm not pushing it. I'm like, this is one of those things that I want to do, and when the time is right,
I haven't done it for 7 years. It's not something that it's almost like it's like an anti-drug. It's like people call it a drug, but it's an anti-drug. It's like I could happily never do it again. I may do it again at some point if I need to, but I could happily never do it again. I wouldn't rush back to do it.
Yes, no, of course. I mean, in my mind, you have to go into that very intentional with the very clear purpose of why you're doing that. And, if that motive is right, then hopefully whatever price you have to pay, aka, it's not a pleasant experience, is a price worth paying for. So you touched upon a couple of points that I want to delve deeper in. So you said at that point, when you were 25, your purpose had become money. That wasn't it in the beginning, right? So when you just dropped out, it was more pursuing your passions. And then some point along between 21, 22 to 25, when you started going into the nightlife, then that transformed into this pursuit of financial, materialistic things. And that's when the feeling of purpose was lost, and this whole spiral of anxiety and, abusing maybe alcohol came in. Can we blame it all on the environment? Is it the nightlife? Is there something else?
Yeah, I think it's quite evident that when you lose purpose, it's a downward spiral. And it's something that I'm very aware of now. Like, although everything that I do now is very purpose-driven, I have to remind myself of what the purpose is and reconnect to it, right, on a regular basis. So part of my morning routine is like going revisiting what the purpose is, what the values are. Are they still the same? Can I connect to it? And then whatever I go out and do in that day is directly related to the purpose, and I feel connected to it, as opposed to things don't get stressful to the same degree when there's that, because there's a reason why you're doing it. You can connect it back. I think what I've learned through that process is I need regular reminders. I need regular kind of check-ins to why I'm doing what I'm doing. And sometimes you can check in and say, oh, maybe it's changed and it's not that anymore. And that's fine as well. We're allowed to change our purpose, our passions, our values at any point. But we're unable to change them unless we're checking in regularly to understand what they are and how they're guiding our decision making.
Amen to that. And this is something that I think about often as well. When I get further, when I just check in with myself and I feel something is really off, that's usually when I don't have the reminders around me. I've forgotten why. I'm sucked into this day-to-day routine of doing these things that I've forgotten why I'm doing. And so unless you know why you're doing what you're doing, it can very quickly become a heavy burden. So this is also something that I speak to my clients about, which is surrounding yourself with, I wouldn't say positive environment, but just meaningful things that remind you who you are, that empower you, that show you where you can go should you choose so. But it's something so basic, but something that people don't do often enough, I think. I mean, what does it take to have a vision board, right? To have some Post-its somewhere in your bathroom to remind you something extremely inspirational. But as everything, it's just as easy not to do as to do. So yeah, reminders, very, very important. Another thing that I wanted to delve back into before we go to the question, which we just spoke about, which is purpose, which is my favorite topic ever. So society's idea of success, right? So again, during that period of life that was very hard for you, it was because you had steered away from what your true purpose was and stuck in this idea that we're all constantly bombarded with, each one of us, of what we're supposed to and should want, what we should achieve, what we should be if we are to be considered successful. And that's such a slippery slope.
I think it's very easy to get hung up on and to focus on the outcomes of success and not the success itself. And we can focus sometimes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we can focus on sometimes on ensuring that we look successful to other people other than feeling successful to ourselves. And that stems from adopting this societal narrative of success as opposed to defining our own narrative, right? So for me, my narrative or my definition of success is waking up every day and working on something that I love and that makes a difference to other people. And that doesn't matter if that's teaching in a school or that's running a massive company. I think the opposite of success that I've seen in other people, in terms of my definition of it, is what's the point in sitting in an office for 50 hours a week, but you're earning millions every year, but you're having to be chained to a desk for 50, 60 hours, and you might get your weekends. It's like being in prison. You get your weekends and you can go out and get drunk and forget about how much you hate it, but you rinse and repeat 2 holidays a year. That's devoid of purpose. Now, some of those jobs have a lot of purpose in, and that's fine, and the reason for doing them may be that. But I think, I think we're always the quote, success is a progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Is that Al Nightingale? And I think that's true, and it's individual. So, you could argue that someone that absolutely loves teaching surfing, they earn minimum wage, but they wake up every day, they're in the ocean, that's what they love to do, they wouldn't rather be anywhere else in the world, versus someone who earns 100 times that, but wakes up every morning hating the fact that they're having to go and sit at their desk and do that job.
And that just comes back to knowing what your truth is, knowing who you are. And there's arguably, at least to me, nothing more important than that. What is your purpose, Loui?
Mine shifts a lot, and it has shifted a lot. I think what I'm finding a lot of purpose in at the moment is trying to change the food system. And within that, it's to a fairer, healthier, more ethical food system. That essentially the businesses that I'm involved with are vehicles to that end, and the work that I'm doing is to that end. I think more recently I'm becoming more interested in preventative health as well, and what that looks like, because
prevention rather than cure.
Yeah, and how diet plays a role in that, but also how things outside of diet play a role in that. So it's fluid, but ultimately it's for the most part now it's helping people, right? And then there's layers. So okay, if it's helping other people, it's being of service to other people and to myself. And the vehicle for that is food, and the vehicle for the food is the brand, the restaurants, etc., etc. I follow my interests and what resonates and what feels right. A big part of that recently has been through the retreats that we run and the plant medicine, and that's been amazing over the last few years. finding a lot of purpose in that. I think you can have more than one. I do.
I guess, what is your definition of purpose then?
What drives you to do what you do, right? What is the driver behind what you do? When you think about what you do, why you do it, right? That for me is what's the why. So yeah, and you know, within that, like a first, I think from my own perspective, just a thirst and a desire for knowledge and for self-improvement. I want to see how good I can be. And good is probably a bit of a cop out, but I mean, you know, if I'm running or I'm doing challenges, if I'm doing jiu-jitsu, if I'm learning about a topic, like how good can I get at those things? How much can I challenge myself within the realms of those things?
This is such an interesting topic that I sometimes think about. For example, talking about gym, even. I've been working out, going to gym probably for over 10 years now. And sometimes people that I know, they're asking, oh, you work out so much. Like, why do you do it? And well, because, you know, it's to be done. It's lifestyle. There's no question about it. It's just what makes me feel good and what I know is good for me. But I also recently thought about, well, I also share this sentiment of yours where I always want to get better, and I also want to push a little bit harder and have some sort of incremental growth that I can see in kind of everything that I do. But where is the balance between that constant pursuit for better and being content in the moment and happy with where you are? And is there a moment that, or disciplines or areas in life where you should not strive?
Okay, I think it's intention, right? So I don't aim to get better at meditation. I think that's counterintuitive. I aim to, I use it as a practice to be in the moment. In the same way that, you know, sometimes I go to jiu-jitsu and it's just to play. It's just playful expression. That's it. I'm not trying to get necessarily better or learn anything. I'm just there just to play. Other times I'm there because I want to learn something. And I think you can almost be more granular and tweak it. Like when I go to the sauna, I'm not trying to beat my sauna time from last time. Although I have historically tried to stay in a sauna for longer each time. So,
but it reaches a point where it's counterproductive.
Exactly. I think it's just about intention, and you can use certain activities for things, right? Like your intention behind going to the gym may be 60 minutes sweat, just to be there, to be in it, to feel into my body and just have that experience without there being an expectation around having to improve on a lift or anything else. Well, you may enter a phase in your life where you need that. And to be able to keep going, you need to have some kind of challenge to be met. Because as humans, we love overcoming challenge. It's what makes us feel alive. So, and maybe there's a different point in your life where there's no other challenges happening and you can challenge yourself within that kind of sphere. But I think to your point, if we're looking through the lens of progression in every area of our life, is very challenging.
It gets exhausting.
Yeah.
Quickly. So talking about health practices, you're doing yoga, doing meditation, doing sauna, doing cold showers, drinking functional mushroom beverages, which I am as well. Dirty, very nice. And doing all these things. Is there anything what is the thing that has made most impact in your health routines, in your health? Sleep.
Sleep. Honestly, like if I don't get at least 7 hours sleep, I'm not useless the next day, but I know about it, right? I really know about it. I think sleep. I think people always ask us like, oh, you know, what supplements do you take? I'm like, unless you get 8 hours sleep, you drink enough water, you calm the mind and calm the body, you get sunlight early in the morning, you eat a clean, whole food diet. Everything else that should be, you almost like want to build on.
That's like a Band-Aid on an open cut.
Yeah, you want to have the foundational principles in play. Enough sleep, diet, exercise, movement, hydration, stress management, baseline. Then you stack the other things on top. And like I say to you, I go to a hyperbaric oxygen chamber once a week. It's amazing. Yes, it helps massively. But unless there's other things are in play, yes, it might still help, but that's secondary, right? That's an add-on, that's a bonus. The foundational principles, which we all have access to, we all should be able to sleep 8 hours a night. We should all, new parents aside and etc. I get there's obviously extreme circumstances. We should all be able to drink enough water every day, exercise 3 times a week, 4 times a week, whatever you like, and get into sunlight early. Probably the habit that has benefited me the most, or the two habits that have benefited me the most, are waking up at 5 a.m. And the reason for that is I know if I need to get 8 hours sleep, I need to be in bed by just before 9 o'clock.
That's what you do.
Yes, it stops me from doing anything stupid the night before, right? I don't get sucked
What
into
about social life? Anyone in the audience will be
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
before
like-
9, what do you mean?
Well, I don't like eating late anyway, because I don't go
6
to
p.m.
sleep on
latest.
Yeah, 6, 7, maybe 7, but 6 for the most part. Easy to get good reservations at 6 p.m. as well. I'm not religious. Like, there's certain days, maybe one day a week, where I go to bed a little bit later if there's anything social going on. But I love that time in the day between 5 and 9. I love that I feel so accomplished by 9 a.m. I wouldn't trade that feeling for the nighttime stuff, right? So getting up at 5 a.m. has been an absolute game changer for me. If I happen to have to go to bed later, then I'll wake up later. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I think that's counterproductive.
But that's the untouchable. This is something that I've recently seen on myself in my own life. I don't know, probably go to bed way past midnight and wake up before 8. So I'll say on average, maybe around 7 hours if I'm lucky. But the night recently, I went to bed at 10. Oh my God. The light shines different. I wake up smiling. Can you imagine?
It's the quality of your sleep is important as well. And there's some things that you can do, right? Blue blockers at night. I have the phone away for an hour before I go to sleep. Read. Calm. I take a magnesium supplement. Magnesium L-theanate is amazing for sleep, to improve sleep. Making sure the room temperature is right. Making sure, I wear an eye mask as well, so it's pitch black. You want to get your stuff set up so that you can have a good night's sleep, because it's not just the length of sleep.
Do you track your sleep somehow?
I do, yeah.
With Whoop? Something
No,
else?
I wear a Garmin, like a watch, and it's linked to an app. Sometimes, not all the time, but yeah, for the most part, I track it as well. You need to get that deep sleep in there as well. You don't want to be waking up all the time.
Because I was listening to the episode of Whoop Founder, and they were extensively talking about exactly what you just said, the quality of sleep rather than just the hours of sleep that you dedicate to it. So that's very important. So you've gone through this complete transition, from black to white in terms of your health, your mental health. What advice would you give somebody struggling with anxiety now? Where to start?
It's such an interesting one, because we're all so different, right? And what works for me might not work for somebody else. But in principle, the things that I did to cope with anxiety were, one, go and do something for someone else. And because I think we all need to feel that we're needed and valued, and the joy and the value that you feel in service to somebody else can often override the feeling of anxiety. Because a lot of the time, anxiety can come from a place of fear, right? When you shift to service, you shift to love. So you go from fear to love, and it's a much higher frequency. It's much more powerful. So service is a really important one. Gratitude. Okay, all of this stuff may be going wrong, but like, what is going right, and how can I focus on that? And even just taking a few minutes to really focus on the things that you're really grateful for. I think the breath can be amazing for that. Using breath work to regulate your nervous system. Certainly something that I've used, and it's been really helpful when it's highly stressful circumstances. And I think also, like, I've solved problems by sitting down, writing it down, and be like, okay, what is the problem? What is, like, if I can identify that it's one particular thing or some things that are causing it, what is the worst thing that can happen? And can I get comfortable with the worst thing that could possibly happen? Okay, would it be so bad if that happened? No. Like, really, like, I think the most extreme version of that is, can you get comfortable with the fact you might die today? I can get comfortable with that. Honestly.
Well, I wouldn't have a choice, would I?
Right, you wouldn't have a choice, but if you can get comfortable with that thought, it's like, okay, like, today's a good day to die, right? If I can get comfortable with that, then what else can bother me? What else can bother me? And I think the only way, like, I can get comfortable with that, because there's a knowing in me that we're infinite. There is no stopping point. Like, and I've seen and experienced things with psychedelics, with meditation, there's a knowing in me that knows that, like, if I die today, that's not it. There's a continuation. But I can only be where I am right now. So even the thought of, if I could die today isn't happening right now, because I can only be here. So I think when we come back to the present as well, it's a very effective way to override anxiety, because anxiety is just future or past, neither of which are happening in the moment that we're in. But we need kind of reminders or mantras or tools or sentences that we can tell ourselves to remind us of that, because it's very, very, very easy to get pulled out of that kind of presence. So yeah, there's a few thoughts on that, I think.
Great advice. And it sounds like a lot of that awareness and security and conviction around what we truly are. Is that something that you were exposed to through psilocybin and through ayahuasca and psychedelics, essentially?
Yes.
Because that was another thing that I wanted to ask you about. Can you expand a little bit more on the substance, why it matters, how it helped you? What's the situation like in UK? Is that something that people can do legally?
No, it's illegal in the UK. There's some countries that it is decriminalized in. There's some countries that it's legal in. So it's decriminalized in Portugal. It's the US in some states has decriminalized it. Some parts of South America it's legal. Psilocybin is the psychoactive part of the mushroom. Certain mushrooms have psilocybin, various degrees of psilocybin, and different mushrooms can also have different effects from the psilocybin that they administer. So if you take a golden teacher mushroom, for example, you would get a slightly different experience from a Hawaiian cubensis. If you were to take a penis envy mushroom, you would need a lower dose, dried they do it dried in grams. You would need a lower dose than, for example, a mushroom. For example, right? My experience with psychedelic mushrooms probably started around 7 years ago, and I did it with a shaman, just me and her, and the experience was different to ayahuasca in the sense that it was less physical in the body. I was more in the mind. Ayahuasca is a big purge. Like, I was physically sick, very, very intense, to the point that I was struggling to make any notes or bring anything back from it. Psilocybin, I was able to really kind of see what was happening. The visions came. I mean, think about if I asked you to imagine a blue bus, how you would see that blue bus in your mind right now, times like 100 is how you see that on mushrooms, right? So the first time I did it, one of the most profound things that happened to me was I had a past life regression. And you would ask, and the skeptic would say, "Oh, how do you know it was a past life?" I don't. I can't confirm that it was a past life. There is a knowing beyond an experience that tells me that it was. But the reason I talk about this is because when I was a child, maybe 2 or 3 years old, I was petrified of sleeping in the dark because I thought the house would catch fire while I was asleep. I had this I thought I was going to wake up and the house was going to be on fire or the house would burn down. And I used to want to have the light on. I was 2 or 3, and I'd forgotten all about this. It was so deep in my subconscious. When I was on the first time I took the mushrooms, I saw myself in a vision in a different body that wasn't it was me, but not
it was your consciousness.
Louie.
Yeah,
it was me in a different body. I knew it to be a different lifetime, and I'd woken up on board a ship that was on fire and I couldn't get out. And when I say the mushrooms told me, my subconscious or the mushrooms or whatever you want to call it, told me that was an experience I'd had in a past life, and I'd carried that trauma into this life. And I just became fascinated. I went away and I read, and over the last 7 or 8 years, it's been something that I've gone back to regularly and used, and I've used it from a healing perspective. I've used it for work. Like, if I'll take a low dose and I'll try and figure out some important decisions that I need to make with regards to work or relationship or whatever it might be.
Microdosing.
Yeah.
And that helps.
But smaller, when I say microdosing, yes, I've done microdosing as well, but microdosing, you're looking at 0.1 or 0.2 grams on a regular basis, few days on, few days off. I'm talking about maybe 2 grams, 3 grams low dose where you're in, but you can still kind of take notes, etc. A ceremonial dose for most people will be between 4 and 6 grams. And this is where more of an experience akin to ayahuasca, albeit typically people aren't being sick and throwing up, but a similar kind of ceremonial type experience. I'll give you another example because I think it's interesting. I've also learned that the energy of the person that grows the mushrooms and the intention they put into it has a direct impact on the experience that you have when you consume them. So a girl that I met gave me some mushrooms, and she said, "I've grown these and I knew I had to give them to someone, and I've met you and I believe it's you. Please take them, do them, let me know how you get on." So I think it was 5 grams, silent darkness. 5 grams is known as a hero's dose. So it's a fairly large dose, like you will have an experience. And I had a blindfold on, room was black, no music, laid down. And the most profound part of that trip, and these trips last 4 to 5 hours typically, the most profound part of that trip was that I became a woman, like in my body. Like I could feel that I was a woman, and I saw myself as a woman walking down a street. And I could hear guys like catcalling me and like shouting stuff. And I felt this incredible vulnerability that I'd never felt as a man, but that also when I recognized that I was just tripping and I wasn't really a woman, I felt this huge shame and guilt for the way that I'd perhaps treated women in the past, where I hadn't necessarily considered the implications of some of the things that I'd done and how the vulnerability they would have felt as a result of my action. And I cried. I was like, I can't believe I wasn't aware of this. And nothing that I haven't done anything like bad consciously, but even things like, expecting someone to like walk by themselves somewhere to meet you. I just never even considered it because it wasn't my experience. And it enabled me to be more compassionate, more empathetic, and essentially be able to relate to someone I wouldn't have otherwise been able to relate to. So I believe psilocybin is just an incredible tool, incredible tool when it's used consciously, when it's used and with good intention, when it's used in the right way. There's lots of things that one would need to do to have a good experience. I think the people that you do it with that oversee the experience is really important. You want people that are experienced, that can help guide you and can help hold the space for you. The setting that you do it within is incredibly important. The emotion, the feeling that you carry into the ceremony or into the trip is often reflected back to you. So if you're in a room where you don't feel safe, the experience will magnify that feeling of insecurity. So set and setting, incredibly important. The people that oversee it, the dose, there's a lot of nuances to it. It's not as simple as just, well, everyone should take mushrooms and they'll be fine. And I must also say that there's a need for proper preparation and integration as well. Preparation in the sense that if you think of yourself as an antenna that receives a signal, if the antenna is broken, it won't receive the signal properly. So the week before you go into a ceremony, it's important that what I like to do is stop using social media, stop engaging in any kind of challenging, negative kind of work or whatever it might be. Diet, definitely no alcohol or any other substances, drop caffeine.
Do you still drink?
No. And then post-ceremony or post-experience for integration, being able to have maybe someone that's trained from a therapy perspective or a psychology perspective or a coach, and someone that you can discuss some of the things that come up, because a lot of the things that come up can be metaphorical. They're not literal. And it's being able to kind of unravel the things that you've seen and make sense of them so that they're actionable and usable in your life beyond that. And so having someone that's able to sit with you and talk through those things is really, really important. And to be able to go back through your own notes. I'll also say that a lot of people go into it, and it's important to go with an intention or something that you want answered, but equally not try to figure out all the answers within the experience. Just almost like surrender and trust the experience.
Because you have enough of your consciousness left that you could try and figure it out all the while. Yes,
you get to a point when once you've done it a few times, you get very comfortable with the visuals and what you're experiencing. So your kind of thinking brain, your conscious mind is very much awake and can, if you allow it, question everything that comes up and have a running commentary on everything that's going on. And that can often prevent someone from getting the breakthroughs that they need because they're trying to understand everything that's happening as it happens in real time.
Sounds like a trap I could fall into.
We all do. I still do.
There's so many things that came up there, but overall, it just seems like an experience that virtually anyone can benefit from. So what's in my mind is why are we still not there?
Well, you can't patent it. You can't monetize it to the same degree you can a pharmaceutical drug. Psychedelics allow you to go to the root cause of the trauma, and on a brain level, essentially it facilitates neuroplasticity to allow for new neural pathways to form in the brain. So if you think about how a habit is formed, a behavior is created in reaction in response to an event. So let's say that something happens to you when you're 5 years old. As a result, you speak up and you're silenced. And then from then on, you don't speak and you revert to turning away every time that happens. The more you perform that behavior, the more the behavior is reinforced. In your brain, the myelin wraps around the neural pathway, strengthens it, becomes more and more of a habit, and it's enforced. So that it becomes a subconscious reaction based on that traumatic experience that you had, which over time you've forgotten about. What happens when you take mushrooms is you allow for new pathways to form, so you can form a different response. You revisit that traumatic event. You understand why it happened. You form a different response. You forgive yourself, the person, whatever it might be. Form a different response. New pathway is formed. But the problem that what happens is if we all go on that healing journey and we all resolve these traumatic things that happen to us and perform new responses and become better people.
We're too healthy for pharmaceutical.
You can't sell it. You can't sell us Prozac and
Yeah.
all these other things, which are, which I'm not saying they don't have their place, and to deal with symptoms. But if we're constantly, perpetually dealing with symptoms rather than cause, we don't ever get to heal. And I think what psychedelics allow for is healing on the level of actually solving the root cause of the problem a lot of the time. Not even solving. I had this conversation the other day. It was interesting. It's like, I don't think that some trauma, for example, is ever fully healed. It's like in the same way that your skin, you have a scar, and that's okay as well. It's a reminder of what happened, but there's a difference between it being an open wound and a scar, and how we feel about it as a scar and embracing it. But I do think they're an incredibly powerful tool, and I do think at some point they will be legalized. I just think the powers that be are potentially finding a way that they can monetize them before that happens.
Yeah, I was literally watching a documentary on Netflix about all the different psychedelics the other day. And as you described in your experience, the experience of, hundreds of thousands of other people is exactly the same. So, it's just so long that they can keep the cat in the bag, right?
And you have to, and it makes me, and I can at times become frustrated and become angry because I've got members of my family, friends that are suffering and that could benefit from at least not legally, and that's challenging because I know how much it's helped me. I've witnessed people multiple times be helped by these things. People that have gone through 10 years of therapy, have been on courses and courses of antidepressants, people that have been suicidal that were sat with these medicines and changed their lives. And yet we're told that they're a Schedule 1 or a Class A and they're not accessible. And in the right way, yes, they should be. I'm not suggesting that tomorrow we legalise, put them on supermarket shelves and give them freely to everyone. But then again, my challenge to that when people bring that up would be, but alcohol is allowed that. Anyone can go into a shop right now and drink 2 bottles of vodka and potentially kill themselves.
Fact.
It's just, that's as dangerous as someone overtaking too much psychedelics. In fact, from a toxicity perspective, you can't take too many mushrooms. You could not consume enough mushrooms to kill yourself from toxicity. You could with alcohol. I think culturally as well, it's almost like you've got this government that says, we don't trust you to actually be able to be responsible for your own well-being in regards to this, but we do in regards to this. Like, you can go and buy this stuff.
Things don't add up. Let's put it that way.
Things don't add up.
Yeah. So this is definitely something that helped you lead a happier life. So did, for sure, also doing work that you love. In fact, you've said that anything I do now, I would do for free. Can you tell me your blueprint to creating a career or a business that doesn't feel like work?
I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like, what do I care about? Okay, I care about, and I make a list, right? I talk about how it relates to what I'm doing right now. What do I care about? What am I uniquely good at? What resources do I have? Essentially, this is something that I wrote down when I was like 16. And what am I good at? Communicating, speaking, networking, whatever that might be. Cool. What do I care about? Food. I want to get people eating healthier, more sustainable food, plant-based, etc. That's what I really care about. What resources do I have? I have a good network of restaurants. I have access to people in the plant-based space, etc. The work I'm doing right now is running an alternative protein company that perfectly meets at the intersection of all those things. When I was 16, what did I care about? I love football, and all I wanted to do all day was play football. Wasn't good enough to play professionally. What was I good at? I was a very good communicator. I could take a 6-year-old and teach them to do a fairly complex skill by way of communication. What did I have? Loads of time. Wasn't at school, wasn't working. So the first year I just volunteered. From that resources list, I could have roof over my head I don't have to pay for because I live with my mom, etc. But loads of time. So I was able to spend that time by volunteering to get good enough to then be able to leverage that experience to be able to get paid for what I was doing. So that's a simple one. A more slightly better one that I've since come across. There's a book called I'm gonna ruin the pronunciation, but Ikagi. Ikagi is a Japanese Ikigai. That's it. Okay. That book is incredible for anyone that wants to try and figure out what they should be doing as well. And I think, look, the beautiful thing is now that I have 20 different careers for a lifetime.
And I think that's the liberating thought as well.
Yeah, we can try. I mean, I've done different businesses,
How many businesses have you started?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Like,
more than
complete random guess.
maybe
Doesn't have
15.
to be 15. How many of those have failed?
Probably 8 or 9.
And that's also so liberating to hear. Because I think for somebody that's just starting off or starting their first business or approaching the idea of doing that, there's this innate feeling that this is it. I have to make it happen.
Everything I've learned has been from the failed ones. Honestly, the biggest lessons have come from the ones that failed. And I'm so glad they happened. Really, I am. There's no ego with it anymore. Like there was at the time. I was like, I probably hung on to some of them too long because from an egoic perspective, I didn't want to be seen like a failure. But I've learned since that actually the way that I've grown is through these failures. If I look people that I look up to and I speak to, it's a very common thread. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs I know have failed multiple businesses. And it's something that I see over and over. It's a really consistent theme with very successful entrepreneurs. A lot of failures.
It's almost the more failures you have, the more proportionate is your knowledge and experience as to how overcome any of the challenges that are about to come. I think there was an article I read a while ago that in US, if you haven't failed any business, the investors don't want to touch you.
I look at when I invest in companies now, I like to look at the founder's background, and if they failed a couple of things, it's like,
better chance of succeeding.
Yeah, I'm getting that value, rather than a first-time founder who hasn't been through those challenges and learned those lessons.
Yeah. Your award-winning restaurant, Erpingham House, is that closed now?
We had 3 before COVID. We now have 1. The biggest one, the first one. I opened the second one 3 days before the first lockdown, and then I opened another one in between that. The third one was in Edinburgh, and the Edinburgh one was doing pretty well. It was just a nightmare to manage it logistically, and the decision was made to scale things back to that first site and kind of rebuild. If I look at the hospitality market right now, it's an incredibly challenging time.
I was going to ask you about that because you've expressed recently that it's a really challenging time for small businesses, for hospitality businesses. Talk to me about that and what can be done.
It's like, I think, as I said to you earlier, literally after this, I'm going to the House of Commons, right? It's not necessarily from a restaurant perspective, from a plant-based perspective. I think it has to come at a legislative level, because what's happening with restaurants at the moment and small businesses is the utility bills that they're receiving so great and so disproportionate to the revenue that many will be forced to close. I'll give you an example. One of my restaurants, our utility bill this time last year was £1,000. Now it's £5,000. If you look at, so I have to make an extra £6,000 to £7,000 per month just to be where I was last year. Meanwhile, these utility companies are making record profits. There's a real challenge from the utilities perspective. There's a challenge because obviously the knock-on effect for that isn't just the direct operation of the restaurant. It's the suppliers that supply the restaurant have to put their prices up, right? You're also in a market where the fact that we're in a recession has been rammed down people's throats and people are not going out and spending as much money. You've got a huge labour shortage, which is pushing the wages up for those that remain in the market. And don't get me wrong, I think people should get paid more in hospitality, but it makes the operating model for a restaurant incredibly difficult. And I think what will happen is that a lot of the independent restaurants that give places so much character will close, because I speak to a lot of the founders. I know that most of them are losing quite a lot of money every month, and there's only so long you can keep doing that. So I hope it doesn't happen. I think it will for a lot of people.
What's the light in the end of the tunnel?
Everything's cyclical, right? We have ups and downs, peaks and troughs. I think at the minute we're in a down market. Happens every 10 to 12 years, sometimes less. It will naturally come back. That's an economic cycle, but I think it's about, at the minute, kind of using the opportunity to build some resilience, creativity, see how you can adapt to what's happening, and try and ride it out. Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. Just for me personally, like where I've got to with it now is obviously going through running a small business, small businesses through COVID, and then these other challenges. You just build an incredible level of resilience when things come up.
What would be, say, 2 tips that you've picked up over COVID that has made you a better businessman?
Double down on purpose. What are we here to do? So during COVID, we're here to feed people healthier, plant-based food. How do we still service that purpose in this time? So we expanded our delivery kitchen. We did the free school meal stuff. We really doubled down on what that meant. We did online classes. We just try to double down on what the purpose was.
And it's important to communicate that as well, right?
Yeah.
Because that is your brand in the end. It makes it stronger.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think it's also important that, particularly in the business where it's so customer facing, you have a team, to really make sure that not only do you believe and do you know what the purpose is and why you're there, but make sure they know why they're there. So when all these challenges are coming up and they're coming into work and the energy can be a little bit lower, they're coming in and they're feeling part of something, and that you're attacking it together, you're figuring it out together. So involving other people, I think, is really important.
You're a self-made businessman, clearly. Is it okay for me to ask you what is your net worth?
It's a really difficult question.
Do you not know?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. And the reason I couldn't tell you is because, I can put a value on the various businesses and the various shares that I have, but it's not tangible.
It's not equivalent to a tangible. Yeah.
I probably invested in 20 plus companies at an early stage, some of which have grown, and the valuations have grown substantially. Others which are okay. None of them have dropped out yet completely. And then other businesses that I have, some assets. Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you.
I asked that because my follow-up question would have been, the one thing that you attribute that success to, that ability to have achieved that?
I'm long-term. I'm very long-term focused, right? So when it comes to money, my belief is that I think money sat in a bank is a waste. It's not working for me. If anything, it's actually devaluing while it sits in a bank. So I essentially keep enough money that I can live off and that I have a run rate for a period of time. Anything surplus, I invest. And at this time where I'm 32, single, no kids, no dependents, I can afford to take risks. And so my investment thesis, values, etc., are based around higher risk, higher reward opportunities. So they're typically angel investing in early stage startups, many of which will fail, but a couple of which hopefully that don't fail will have an exponential return on investment. So, if I've invested in 20 companies, I would expect that maybe 2 or 3 will succeed and will generate me a return that not only covers the ones that haven't worked, but way beyond that. And so my focus at the moment, and certainly over the next few years, will be to continue to invest in early stage companies best that I can. And I probably allocate 30 to 40% of what I earn into that activity. And I enjoy it as well. I love working with startup founders, and even if it's like an hour, even if it's an hour a month, or joining a meeting or making an introduction for them, I get so much out of that.
Over time, because you've already invested in quite a few, is there a common thread between the ones that have succeeded?
Great founders.
How do you distinguish who's a?
Meet them, get a feel for them, understand their background, ask about them, people that I trust their opinions of. I can normally kind of figure people out pretty well, I think.
What is that indicator that gives you that feeling that they could be it?
I look for the character traits I look for: resilience, creativity, focus, connection to the purpose of what they're doing, who have they got around them, who they've been able to attract. It's quite a good precursor to someone that's going to do well. Yeah, and they have to be doing something that I'm attached to as well, that I care about.
Aligned with
it's not purely a money play. Like, it has to be something that I care about as well. Sometimes, I've invested in stuff that I don't think is going to work. I've done one recently. I don't really think it's going to work. I won't say which one it is, obviously, but I don't really think it's going to work from a business perspective.
So what made you invest in that?
I love what they're trying to do. I really love it, and I think it will set a precedent for other businesses that come later. I think they're just a bit early. Maybe it will. It's a bit of a punt, but I like the founders and I like what they're doing.
So you're extending a helping hand in a way. So you being an angel investor, you're always looking out for what's
As
there.
much as I can reasonably afford. Yes.
Yes, what's there and what's coming kind of up. So
Yeah.
for anyone that's listening, that's wondering where should they look to? What is the next big thing? What is the
Focus
field?
on solving problems. Like it's all businesses. It's creative solutions to problems that create value for all stakeholders. So it has to be win-win-win. And a stakeholder that has to be included now is the planet, obviously, and the community, whether that community is local or national or international. So I think just focus on solving problems. What problems are likely to arise in the next 5 to 10 years? How can you create a solution to those problems, and how can you make it value add for everyone? I think they're the best businesses.
Definitely. Could you share 3 of the very important lessons that you've gathered over your lifetime?
I think probably the biggest one is discipline is freedom.
There's a book like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that discipline? Is that okay?
Discipline equals freedom.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. So yeah, so discipline is freedom, and what I mean by that is, again, I'm bastardizing a quote that I heard recently, and it really resonated with me. Is that we think that freedom is the freedom to pursue our desires, but freedom is freedom from our desires. And I was definitely in a position of I believe that freedom was just me pursuing everything that I wanted. But actually, freedom is freedom from the things I think I want. The discipline in understanding that and being able to stick with that has given me more freedom. Because, we are abundant, but all of us are abundant by default. We can attract anything that we want. And that's why we have to be very careful what we wish for, because we might get all of it. And very often we do get all of it, and it's not actually what we wanted or what we needed. So yeah, discipline, I think, love, doing things from love and not fear. And I think this is one of the things that I check myself on. I'm like, is this coming from love or fear? And pretty much all the bad decisions I can trace back come from fear, whether that's fear in the sense of like, am I doing this so people think this of me? That's attached to fear, as opposed to, am I doing this because of the feeling of this? So choosing love over fear, and just not taking anything too seriously. Like, even when really challenging stuff comes up, I try and find a way to laugh, or try and find a way to make it not as bad. Like, we just don't have context to fully understand whether something is good or bad in the moment that it happens. So I try and not judge anything as good or bad as it comes up. Rather take a step back and allow it to be, and try and, later on, often when that's happened, I've realized actually that wasn't bad at all. I thought it was bad at the time and it felt bad, but it wasn't.
That resonates with me so strongly. I've had situations in my life where truly, by all measures, you would say, well, this is a disaster. But even in that moment, I've had this silent, tiny voice at the back of my head, which says, hold on, you just
wait and see.
Wait and see. And I'll dare say, even one up that, you'll see that this actually will trigger something good down the line. And you correctly said, one of my favorite sayings is everything is relative. So in a way, everything is neutral that happens. And the way we see it and the way we perceive it then adds color to it. So if we withhold the judgment, things stay in this magical, neutral state. And only with time, then, as things unfold, again, we have that power to then attach some sort of meaning. Oh, that was then good. Oh, that was then bad in hindsight. But until we actually staple a label on it, it's nothing. And I think that's something worth thinking about a little bit more often, especially when going through difficult times, what we perceive and feel to be difficult. That realization that they don't have to be difficult at all. We're making them difficult for ourselves. But you touched upon another thing that I want to talk about, love. So this is actually the conversation that we bonded over when we last spoke. So talk to me about your relationship with romantic relationships.
We had a really good conversation about this, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
It was interesting.
What's your so you said you're single. What's your biggest revelation about women that you wish you knew back in the day?
It's actually something that we discussed. We were talking about what is the primary driver for women in a relationship versus what is the primary driver for men. And what I've come to understand is the primary driver, the primary thing that women look for in a relationship is safety. The form of that safety is often consistent with the trauma that person's experienced through childhood. So if someone's grown up financially unstable, they will look for financial safety. If they've grown up in a physically challenging environment, they will look for physical strength, etc. And that safety will manifest in various ways. I think for men, very often the first thing that we look for is, and it's a very primitive subconscious bias, is looks. What do they look like? And I think, probably in the past when I've chosen or, thought that I wanted to be with someone, it's been very much, how do they look? Am I physically attracted? And do we have similar interests? They've been the kind of
which
two
is very
things.
important.
Which is important for sure. And I'm not discounting that at all, but perhaps they've been the kind of the primary drivers. And I think as well, like one of the things that I've realized recently is that we think of love as something that we have to direct and attach to someone else. So when I say that, like if I'm in love with someone, it's like that now to me doesn't make sense as much as I'm in a state of love, and that love extends to anyone and anything that I come into contact with, as opposed to I love this person, and it's purely channeled at this person. That almost brings up for me like an element of possession and ownership, and it's not unconditional. It's conditional on that person loving me as well. I'm only going to love that person loves me. That's conditional, and it's based on...
That's immature love.
Yeah, and I think that's probably been a lot of my experience to date. I also think that maybe my priority hasn't always been around cultivating relationship.
How so?
It's been because work has been the priority for me.
And this is a recurring pattern with a lot of men. I see all the time.
It's a recurring pattern for
Where's
me,
the balance in that?
It's a good question. I think there's a need for transparency when you enter into a relationship. I think there's also it's a flow, right? It's seeing what works and what doesn't. It's very challenging. I think particularly when you're so driven in a certain area, for someone who has an expectation around being a priority, to see that they're not a priority is very, very challenging with people, and it can trigger people, and it can be a mirror, right? If for example, I in a relationship very much focused on work, and I make the other person a secondary priority, if they felt that way before growing up or whatever, that can be a mirror for them to reflect back to that experience and bring up those feelings and how that felt at that time. I think it's all about compatibility and being able to relate to the other person, and at least if you can't relate, there's a degree of empathy to try and understand that person as well, and there's a degree of sacrifice. But if I'm fully transparent, it's not a sacrifice that I've ever been fully, or compromise that I've ever been fully willing to make.
Very many interesting points I want to touch upon. So definitely communication, which transpires, with conversation with you or virtually, I think anyone who's thought about this, communication is really key. And people say this all the time, but that's so true. As you said, be intentional, be super clear about what you're after. I think the challenge is when you don't know. When you don't know what you're after, you don't know what your love language is, you don't know what your trauma is, you actually have no idea what you're looking for in a partner and what you want and what you need. Two very different things. And talking about priorities. I've heard this. I've said this before. We're all been in that situation. What should be the priority? How do we manage our relationship in this dynamic? So I think in scenarios, especially where there's a man that has a man or a woman, basically one party that has an extremely engaging job, which then doesn't practically allow for a normal lifestyle dynamic with the partner, or doesn't allow enough attention, there has to be an extremely clear intention and future plans laid out. Because I think, and I mean, I say this because I've spoken to I don't know how many women about this. The problem is uncertainty. And I think if you're with a good partner, and again, it can go other ways. I'm just saying this purely because it's still kind of what happens more often. If you have a plan together that, okay, you have an intention to be together, to build a life together, I don't think that one party, if they both love each other, if they both have laid out what their idea of a relationship is, if they align, So it's a matter of also finding a person that is compatible. They never have to be the same as you. That's a big mistake.
It's coming back to that. I think the most important thing is shared values.
Yes.
And a shared vision of what you want things to be.
Yeah. And if those match.
And if those match, and that can change, right? And I think there's also this thing of like, we have this kind of fairy tale thing of like, forever and ever and locked in. And I'm like, you know what? Nothing's permanent. Nothing in the world is permanent. It's something that I got really comfortable with over the last year or so. I'm like, nothing's permanent, and that's okay. You may have 6 relationships in your life. You may be married 3 times. Like that. That's fine, right? It's like we can grow in different directions, and something can be beautiful while it's beautiful, and then it can end, and that's also okay. And so yeah, I've been kind of playing with that. I think being by yourself is totally fine as well. Like, yep. I enjoy my own company. I like being by myself. It allows me at the moment to do the things that I want to do, and that's fine. So yeah, I think there's many different ways to exist as well.
Very, very true. And I think there's still this societal pressure on people to be in a relationship. You know, starting from the parents, grandparents, they're like, where are our grandkids? You know, to even practical things, you know, life insurances, you know, houses. What if you go to the hospital? If you're alone, like the society is not really built for single people. And fair enough, that is probably to ensure our species continuing. Fair enough. But yeah, there's a thin line, I think, between, again, where you keep listening to what others are trying to enforce on you and what the society wants.
What feels right for you?
Yeah,
exactly where you're at, right? Because you may be entering a really, period of life where you're really focused on a project and you don't have space for that. Maybe another period of life where you do have space for that. I think it's about what works for the individual at that stage in their life.
Very, very true.
I was told something by a friend recently, and it's probably my biggest breakthrough in my own relationship that I've had. And it was such an offhand comment, but it really kind of like, when like you have like aha moment.
Yeah.
And he was like, you choose women that you don't think you can get, so you validate the part of yourself.
Insecurities.
The validate your insecurities, exactly.
Well, that's if you're still in that stage of trying to learn to love yourself, I guess. Because when you've fully healed and when you're not anymore linking to the insecurities or trying to validate yourself, prove yourself to the others, then you choose safe love. Speaking of love, you spoke about being in love and the different states of love. That's also a topic that I really like. For myself, I've always thought that even this term of being in love, to me, doesn't make much sense. Or at the very least, it is what I would say is that immature love. So what I mean by that is it's very conditional. Yeah. So now I'm in love with you. I just met you. I'm in love with you. Everything's rosy. And then I fall out of even the words, how they're built is in love means you can be out of love. So to me, that means that is fake love, means that was never truly real love. Whereas when I say love, that to me means something that is permanent, that is unshakable, that is unconditional. So for example, if I truly love someone and we have a relationship and the relationship ends and maybe it doesn't end well, I will still forever love that person because I have love for them, for who they are. And that will never change.
I think that's something that's really difficult for people to grasp as well. It's like you're in a relationship with someone, let's say for a year or 2 years. You're vulnerable in that relationship. You expose the deepest parts of yourself. You form this connection, and then it's done. And and it's almost like the expectation culturally, and I think the ego doesn't want to be hurt, doesn't want to be vulnerable. And it's also if you kind of correlate that with the cultural message that comes through music and television and social, it's almost this thing of like it's the opposite of vulnerability. It's like them or like it's quite toxic, and it discourages particularly like young men from being able to be vulnerable about there's a lot of trauma there. It's especially if you, yes, especially when you've had a deep connection with someone and that ends, or it's a lot of damage, or it can lead to anxiety, depression, etc., etc. For that lack of connection, or I think that, yeah, just the way that, you know, the music that we listen to in particular, it's all based around kind of like almost like disrespecting the other person and like payback,
Yeah,
and like,
it's very proprietary, very
yeah,
objectifying, very
exactly,
superficial, and
exactly.
let's not even go there.
It is, right?
Definitely not to be taken as a benchmark to learn from where
For
how
sure.
to
But
be in a relationship.
I think for me, it's like, you know, the vulnerability component to that is very important, to be able to speak and say, you know what, yeah, this, to be able to voice it, because voicing it and talking through it is like, yeah, you know, like when that came to an end, it was right that it came to an end, but you have to also recognize and own the fact that you've have formed a connection with someone, and you still have love for them. You know, like people that I was with 10 years ago, I'm like, I still have love for that. I have love for that person, because in that time there was a connection, and it was, and it was what it was. It just wasn't the right thing for both people.
Well, what if you have no closure, or the person disappears? I think that's a very traumatic, can be a very traumatic experience. And you also touched upon ego very correctly. I think what most people do, and which is completely normal because that's how the society works, is we think still about ourselves. It's like, okay, the relationship ends, they leave, something's wrong with me. But why are we thinking about us? Why are we thinking about us? If we were a bit less selfish and just thought actually about that, it's not actually probably about you even. It's about something that person is going through. Something does not click for that person. So, which ties right back to the service and the way that you view your whole life and the way you approach everything you do. If everything that you do is about you, then tough life. Like literally tough life.
Very tough.
Whereas if you pay attention a little bit more to other people, it becomes so much lighter, because even in this instance, which happens to everyone, there's a heartbreak. Stop focusing on yourself and your heartbreak. Be less egotistic. Think about the other person. What are they going through actually? How often do we think about the other person during a heart? We're just like, oh, they did this to me. They hurt me. I was wronged.
You reinforce the narrative on yourself, right?
Yeah. Why?
It's almost like people are like identifying with that pain.
There's no need.
There's no need.
Shifting the focus towards the good parts. Okay, fine. It's ending. If it ended, can you fix it? Is there something that you haven't explored, that hasn't been thought through, that has maybe been misinterpreted? You know, try to mend it. If it's impossible and you've done what you can, then make peace with it and focus on all the beautiful things that you've had together, because there's certainly plenty.
I think there's a beauty. I know like heartbreak can be really challenging, but there's a beauty in it as well, right? It's like we get to feel. Yeah. I'm sure I've had times where I can't feel anything in certain times where it's darker, and like we just want to feel something. And with heartbreak, like we really feel, right? We really feel like there's something very human about it. Like if you can sit with it and like, wow, like think of all the amazing art and music that's come from heartbreak, right? You know, the first thing it gave me was like a real kind of like motivation for looking after myself. I'm like, right, I really want to I want to replace this love with love for myself. And so I want to, my training, my diet, like it really like helped me dial back into that. And I think, you know, it's also, you can, when you are in that feeling, it can be very easy to turn to negative. Like, I'm gonna go and get drunk so I don't have to think about it, or these coping mechanisms that we've perhaps engaged with previously that aren't effective, that actually make things worse. It's an opportunity to deploy. I think that happens less
when you're aware.
Yes.
When you're present, you're aware. It's hard to fool yourself. You're just like, really? Am I gonna drink? Is that gonna help? Probably not. You know. But interesting point. You know, you said how many beautiful things come out of sad or, you know, deemed negative emotions, and there's this almost demonization of bad emotions. Why do we even call them bad? It's just a spectrum of emotions. You know, sadness, grief, anger, they're all a part of the spectrum and full emotion palette.
It's witnessing the emotion rather than identifying with the emotion.
Exactly.
Right? Like if something comes up, like rather than I'm sad, it's like, well, can you just observe the feeling as it comes up rather than identifying with it and sit with it?
Yeah. But can we do that with the positive ones as well?
Mm.
Because that's the thing, right? That's what I'm trying to say. People are so hungry for all the good emotions, and they're so averse from having the bad emotions. Whereas again, if we looked at them more neutrally and embraced the whole spectrum, then there would be less resistance.
We have an epidemic of culture, of comfort. We have an epidemic of comfort. And I think that unless we consciously choose discomfort, it is served to us at a time that is not of our choosing. And we're not ready to meet it. Pick your poison, however you want to have it. For me, getting in an ice bath, never want to do it, very uncomfortable. I'm not good at it in the sense that I want to get out straight away. But I know that if I can do that in the morning, the rest of the day stuff comes up. I've already been challenged today. What next? You know, like finding ways to make yourself uncomfortable so that you can meet yourself there, right? And really, we know ourselves in discomfort.
It brings it back to trust as well, as you said.
Yeah.
Small proofs that
this
you
is
can
how we
do
know
it.
other people as well. And when uncomfortable things happen, right? When challenging things come up, so you get to really see someone's personality, how they react to situations that are uncomfortable. But I think, I mean, you know, it come from a good place. The road to hell's paved with good intentions, but it's come from a good place to get to where we are culturally, where, you know, we get our groceries on demand. Someone comes and delivers them. We can get a taxi come right to us. We can binge watch a TV series, don't have to wait. Like, it's come from a place of good intention, but it's the outcome of that level of comfort is that we're not able to build resilience to the everyday challenges of life. And I think when we are not challenged, we become bored and we find things to be challenged by which we shouldn't be challenged by. And I'm not going to go down that path because that's a whole other conversation. But I think, you know, it stems having an argument with someone over how they refer to a certain person. You wouldn't have time for that if you were
doing something worthwhile.
Yes.
Yeah. Definitely. I agree. Louie, what's next for you?
I'm enjoying building the company that I'm building at the moment. I'm trying to double down on that and really focus. Rather than spinning 10 plates, I'm trying to effectively spin one, which has always been a challenge for me because I always have multiple projects going on. Focus on that, focus on my training, focus on myself, focus on how I can be of service in that it aligns with my values, and enjoy and endure this experience that is life.
And as a last question that I like to ask is, what would be your recipe for happiness?
A little bit of challenge / discomfort, a little bit of passion, purpose, a little bit of community, presence.
I like that. Thank you so much, Louie. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, friends. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe and share it with someone. I would love to hear your feedback and suggestions as to what guests you would like to see on the show next. See you next week.